The summer of 2009 in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, tasted of salt and diesel. It was a baptism by ice and brine, and it was where I met Elias. He was a fisherman, I was a deckhand, and our love was a slow burn, kindled in the shared exhaustion of 16-hour days and the wild, lingering twilight of the north. We found a sanctuary in the cramped quarters of his boat, the Kodiak Queen, an island of warmth in a world of harsh, beautiful realities. Unlike so many other seasonal flings that evaporated with the autumn fog, ours was forged with different steel. We didn't just talk about the future, we blueprinted it on worn nautical charts. A trawler of our own, a plot of land in Washington, a life built with our own hands, far from the clutches of the Bering Sea. The end of the season, therefore, wasn't an ending for us. It was a beginning. The day I left Dutch Harbor, it wasn't on a ferry watching him shrink on the dock. I was on the Kodiak Queen with him, part of a skeleton crew sailing her south for the winter. The mournful cry of the gulls didn't sound like goodbye. It was a salute. We were the ones who had made it out together. We landed in Washington with the season's earnings in our shared bank account and a tangible, electrifying hope. We found it a month later, 5 acres of damp, fertile earth just outside a misty coastal town, complete with a dilapidated cottage choked by blackberry brambles. It was perfect. The air smelled of pine and wet soil, a stark contrast to the sharp brine of the sea. We bought it. For the first 7 months, we lived our dream. Life was a montage of productive, satisfying aches. We tore out rotten floorboards, stripped ancient wallpaper, and painted the walls a warm, creamy white. Elias, a man whose hands were built for mending nets, proved just as adept with a hammer and saw. His quiet focus was a creative force, and watching him frame a new wall was like watching a sculptor at work. We planted a garden, our fingers deep in the dark, rich soil. We even got the dog we'd talked about, a scruffy, 3-legged mutt from the local shelter we named Tug. At night, we'd collapse into bed, exhausted and content, our bodies smelling of sawdust and paint thinner instead of fish and diesel. We had done it. We had built our sanctuary on land. But the land is not the sea. The quiet that we had craved in the chaos of Alaska began to feel different. It wasn't peaceful, it was empty. The cracks started to appear around the 4th month, so fine you could barely see them. Elias finished the major repairs on the house, and with no big project to consume him, a restlessness took root. He'd wake up before dawn, just as he had for the fishing season. But now there were no nets to check, no engine to roar to life. There was only silence. He started taking long walks, always heading west, to the cliffs overlooking the Pacific. He'd stand there for hours, watching the waves, but this ocean was different. It was tamer, a domestic beast compared to the wild god of the Bering Sea. I got a job at the town's bookstore, enjoying the scent of old paper and the quiet conversations with customers. I was building a new life, making friends, putting down roots in the community. Elias, however, remained adrift. He started talking about Alaska again. At first, it was with the fondness of a shared memory. But slowly the tone shifted. He wasn't remembering a hard life we'd escaped, but a paradise we had foolishly abandoned. He romanticized the danger, the bone-deep exhaustion, the all-or-nothing gamble of the catch. The camaraderie of his crew, once a source of funny anecdotes, became a eulogy for a brotherhood he could never replicate here. He was a fisherman, and that identity wasn't just a job title, it was his very essence. In our quiet life, surrounded by the stability he claimed to want, he was a ghost. Our conversations grew strained. The garden looks great, I'd say. Maybe we should build a proper fence this weekend. He'd stare out the window we had installed together. There's a storm coming in, he'd murmur, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs only he understood. Big one. The guys on the Viking are probably heading out right into it. He wasn't with me in our cozy kitchen. He was on a phantom deck, tasting the salt spray. I felt my role shifting from his partner to his anchor and then to his keeper. I was trying to hold him to a life he was no longer sure he wanted. The end came on a Tuesday, in the 7th month. It was raining, a steady, miserable Washington drizzle that had lasted for days. He was cleaning a non-existent spot on the countertop, his knuckles white. "It's not working, Clara," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth I had fallen in love with. "What's not working?" "The faucet. I can call a plumber." "Us," he interrupted, finally looking at me. His eyes were hollow. I can't breathe here." He told me he'd been on the phone with his old skipper. They needed an experienced hand for the winter king crab season. He explained it wasn't about me, that he loved me, but the words were meaningless, because the truth was in his next statement. "I don't know who I am when I'm not on the water," he confessed, his voice cracking. "I'm nothing here, just a guy in a house." The dream we had built hadn't been a sanctuary. For him, it had become a cage. The stability was a slow suffocation. He didn't want the anchor. He needed the storm. He left the next morning. He packed one duffel bag, leaving the tools in the shed and his half of the clothes in the closet. We stood on the porch we had built together, Tug whining softly at my feet. There was no grand, cinematic farewell. It was just a quiet, devastating admission of defeat. He kissed my forehead, a ghost of a touch, and whispered, "I'm sorry," and then he was gone. I was left alone in our perfect house, surrounded by the fruits of our shared labor. That evening I didn't cry. I just sat on the floor with Tug's head in my lap, the scent of fresh paint and pine in the air. I looked at the warm, creamy walls, the sturdy floorboards, and the window that looked out onto a life I no longer had. The silence he had hated was now my own, and it was deafening. Our dream hadn't been shattered by a sudden squall. It had simply, quietly, and irrevocably dissolved in the rain, embracing the chaos while still moving forward.